Hello everyone, this is Yu Tsai. Welcome to Let's Talk. Well, I'm so excited for my guest today because we have a lot of stuff in common. And not just because we're both Asian Americans, because we both come from fashion to the food world. And the food world is a fun world. So we're going to talk about all his journey from one place to the other and taking us on so many different places on his food journey on the show, Lucky Chow. Everyone, welcome William Lee. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Well, first of all, tell us where you at.
Right now I'm actually in New York. I came into the city for the day to run some errands, this is my first time back in New York City since March 8th. I've been spending most of my, actually all of my time during this cookie time in upstate New York, in a small town called Austerlitz, right on the New York-Massachusetts border. About 2 hours north of New York City.
We've been following you on Instagram. We've seen beautiful flowers and wonderful skylines, and what a place to be! What an amazing place to be. So that's a nice little place to kind of isolate and reflect and revisit the city all over again. It's like a whole new discovery, right?
Yeah, it's been fun. I've only been here a couple of hours, but it feels great to be back in New York. The energy is different, but there's still definitely energy. I took a walk through Chinatown. It's not quite what I remember, but shops are open, restaurants are open, and people trying to kind of regain some level of normalcy.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for joining me today on the show. I got to read all about your bio, and I got to do a little bit of research on you, and I just find that it's so fascinating and rewarding to learn your history, because along the way of your career, you've broken a lot of bamboo ceilings, glass ceilings for the Asian community, and I really want to talk about that, so let's dive right in.
Sure.
You started in the industry, in the fashion world first.
Yes. So I actually, after I graduated college, I spent 2 quick years working in an advertising agency, and soon after working at an agency, I started in magazine publishing. I was at Hearst Magazines for a couple of years, and then I spent 15 years at Condé Nast. I joined Condé Nast in 2005 on the relaunch of House and Garden. And then over the years, I worked for many of their best publications, The New Yorker, Condé Nast Traveler. I was the launch publisher of Men's Vogue in 2006, which was pretty exciting. No, I joined in 1995. Oh my God, that's how old I am. I said 2005, but it's really 1995. Wow. So I was at Men's Vogue for about 3 years, and then I went on to launch Condé Nast's very sort of big, ambitious business magazine called Portfolio, which unfortunately launched in 2008, right when the financial crisis happened. So that was not a long-lived venture. And then after that, I was at Condé Nast Traveler. So all in all, almost a decade and a half at Condé Nast, which was an incredible learning experience. And, really my time at Men's Vogue put me sort of front and center of the fashion world, which is someplace I never actually had any ambition in being in. But I just sort of landed there, and it was an incredible experience.
And for those audience out there that don't really understand the publishing side, give them a little bit of description of what your responsibilities like launching a magazine like Men's Vogue.
Yeah, so as the publisher, so their magazines are separated into the editorial side and the publishing side. So it's basically creative and business. So while the editors are in charge of creating all the content, the business people, including especially the publisher, is leading the team that's responsible for ad sales, marketing, promotion, events, circulation, basically driving all the revenue into the magazine. So, for the most part, the job is really about selling as much advertising as possible to as many people as possible.
And you were the first executive in that position as an Asian American.
Yes. So in 2005, when I was named publisher of Men's Vogue, I was the only publisher of color at Condé Nast in the history of Condé Nast US. And at the time, I was also the only openly gay a publisher at the company. To this day, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, I still am the only publisher of color that has ever held that position at Condé Nast US.
And why do you think that? What do you think is the reason for that?
Oh God, we only have an hour. So, I think it's a lot of things. So first and foremost, I think that traditional career paths for Asian Americans or American Asians, American-born Asians such as myself. I mean, if you have immigrant parents, the traditional career paths are law, medicine, engineering, maybe accountant, that type of thing. So I think that, there, with my generation at least, there wasn't a huge amount of interest to go into creative fields because creative fields were considered not as lucrative, not as safe, not as serious as maybe law and medicine. Having said that, I also feel that the worlds of media, the worlds of fashion, the worlds of culture are not necessarily worlds that are very welcoming to people who don't necessarily come from that world. And I'll give you a perfect example of how I kind of landed in advertising. When I was in college, I actually majored in art history, and what I really wanted to do was become an expert in a field. Maybe work in a gallery, work in an auction house. And when I graduated college, as I was graduating college, I sent in letters and resumes to the top galleries, the top auction houses. And the fact of the matter is I did actually get quite a bit of interest and could have gotten a job in any of those places. But the problem is the entry-level salaries for most of those places, and I will include media as well, you're not making very much money. So oftentimes, those entry-level jobs, because of what they pay, really only go to people whose parents can afford to send them through their first job at Christie's. And, I sort of ended up in advertising with the thought of, well, I'm interested in something creative, but I also need to sort of, do something that is going to pay the rent and is kind of like a business. So advertising was kind of a great place for me to start. Not that I made a lot of money there either, but it was certainly more than I would have made as a receptionist at a great gallery on 57th Street. So this is a long way of answering your question. I think that creative fields, and to this day, I don't think there is enough outreach to communities of color to make these companies interesting or make them sort of even within the realm of consideration. I think a lot of people think media and fashion is very, very exclusive, and it has been to its detriment. And as you can see what's happened in the last 2-3 months, the tide is turning. But I think that ultimately companies are going to have to put their money where their mouth is. They're going to have to recruit at schools and universities and in communities that don't necessarily turn out the traditional candidate for a fashion house or a traditional candidate for a media company. I think they have to make a bigger effort. And having said that, I also think that there needs to be a level of mentorship and leadership within these companies to encourage the people and grow the people who are already at those companies and give them brighter futures. I think it's a little astounding that to this day, there hasn't been another Asian American, African American publisher at Condé Nast US. That is very, very surprising to me.
I do think I agree with you. I do believe it's twofold. One is that being a publisher, you're truly the financial engine behind the creative, and it's easy for for people to understand the creative side of it and want to be on the creative side of it because they're really the front face of the type of work that they can be out there. Especially in the recent 10 years of social media and being present, being involved on the front end of the magazine, being involved in that way of creative is something that's really celebrated. And you're right. It has to come from education. It has to come from knowing that publishers are just as important. Without it, there's nothing you can print. Without the collaborations of advertisers and whatnot, you wouldn't be able to have those pages and glossy, pages to turn and amazing models and celebrity photographer like me get to photograph. And I feel that within the last 3 years, at least for my exposure working with a lot of Asian magazines, I truly then realized how much responsibility as a photographer that we have to listen to the publishers. Because I think for the longest time that they live very far apart from each other. The egos
Church and
are
state, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely. The publisher leave us alone. We know what's a good cover, and then sometimes the publisher come in. And I experienced that myself by putting 5 covers forward to the editor-in-chief of Harper's Bazaar, Singapore, for example. And it would get pushed back and say, well, we need more XYZ because the publisher doesn't respond to this. And then at first, that just, our natural inkling as a creative, what do you know about art?
Right.
What do you know about which picture is the right picture? Well, and then surprisingly, they actually know because they have to put money where the mouth is and mouth where the money is, right? We need to make sure that the magazine do sell. And with that understanding, I think it's so important for artists, for photographers out there, for stylists out there, for people in the beauty industry. If they can understand more what the responsibility of publishers and the engine behind them, it's really there to support. And without it, look at the magazine world right now. Look at all the glossies right now. The publishers are more important than the actual content creators because we cannot create without publishers.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, I absolutely agree with you, and I think that with social media and digital media and how those platforms allow brands to gauge return on investment quite easily. If you buy ads on Instagram and you do it well, you see a direct return on investment for those advertisements. Having said that, I also think that the great editors of today, and it's funny, I came from the publishing world, but now in my current life, I'm actually a contributing editor at Town & Country and Elle Décor here in the U.S., where I'm on the content creation side. And I will say that the modern day successful editors, and I will use my dear friend Stellene Volandes as an example. These are editors. I think successful editors today are editors who understand how to create magazine content that is exciting, that people, creating content that people can't get online. I think that, the power of print is still extremely strong, but I think that, in a lot of places, editors have sort of given up to, social media, like, oh, we can't compete with that, so let's just kind of do the same thing that social media is doing, which is kind of like quick sound bites of information, sort of easily digestible content, when in fact, what people really turn to magazines for is an incredible experiential, tactile kind of product. And I think that magazines still can serve that purpose, but I think that there are very few editors today that really sort of go that extra mile and who are passionate about the platform. Stellene is one of them. I look at what Radhika Jones is doing at Vanity Fair. I think she's doing an incredible job. I'm really excited to see what Samira is doing. Edward Enninful at British Vogue, I think, is doing an incredible job. So I think that, good editors also, to sort of finish on your point, understand that magazines now really are a commercial entity. And it's super competitive. If you have a fashion advertiser who has $4 million to spend and you want as much of that pie as possible, how are you going to give them content and an environment that feels as urgent as Instagram or YouTube or something else? It's really become much more of a business. And I think that's a great thing for magazines because as I grew up in the business, editorial and business were church and state. And I fully respect that. I spent 3 years at the New Yorker, where church and state, there was no magazine in the world that was more church and state than the New Yorker. And that that sense of purity leads to a great product. But I think that as, particularly for fashion magazines, style magazines, lifestyle magazines, are now competing with digital marketing, you just have to be a little bit more flexible while staying true to who you are.
Well, I love you saying that because we have seen this history play out over and over. We can see that when YouTube became very popular, the magazines who jumped on content creation and embraced the influencers definitely tap into a market that fulfilled the need. And I feel like it's really generational because I come from traditional advertising background with our Now group. For years and years, I did traditional advertising. But one of the things I learned a lot while I was there, I was a creative director for them on the West Coast, is that as the web world developed, as content delivery service could be diversified, he embraced it. And that's something that a lot of agencies are really kind of old machines. They just do the same thing. And magazines fall into that world as well. 6 years ago, we saw the changes at Hearst, Condé Nast, where they started dropping print teams and moving the digital team to the print team, and thinking the digital team would actually be able to communicate to the print audience the same. And years later, they had to switch it back because it is two different audiences. And I feel it is a generational thing. The audience that you capture, that you have nurtured, you have to hold on to them. And then you have to then develop to really speak to the new audience. They're not separated, and both media is really, really important.
Yes.
Now we're just talking about advertising, but I love this conversation because I think it's so relevant to what's happening now. How do we speak to people so that people can hear? Because there's a lot of noises out there right now, and I call them noises because within all that noise, there has to come with a voice. And we are beginning to see that in the fashion industry, as you said. Your name, editor Edward. Colors are beginning to be painted where we haven't seen a lot. Responsibility and are people who are living up to, as you say, walk the walk and talk the talk, and not by choice. I'm sorry to say, not really by choice, but by the force of nature of people's voices, telling them make these changes. And I said this with truly, I hope, with the most deepest desire that it will change, and it is Condé Nast. It is a very white-dominated magazine world.
Yeah.
I say that, and I work with them as well. And thank you for having me work with you. But it wasn't until there were more colored people in the places of creative that I was then embraced more and being part of the family. And that's firsthand experience.
Yes.
And you can never discredit that, right? You can never discredit that having all the color of the rainbow, you can paint anything you want.
Yes.
And that's so important that we recognize that now, and we're beginning to see that change. And I hope this change is permanent. It's not a trend.
I actually think this is I think that the last couple of months and this sort of global kind of reckoning that we've had is here to stay. And I think that the one thing that's going to continue to be sort of the wind on the backs of this movement is the fact that advertisers and companies and brands are demanding that media companies are more diverse. They are demanding that content is created by people who are more diverse. So, talk about putting your money where your mouth is. These media companies are going to have to show, consumers and marketers that they represent what the changing face of America, of the world, is looking like. And I think that when there's money behind that, things change quite quickly.
I hope so. And
Fortunately and unfortunately.
And there happened a lot of movement that happened in the last 6 years. I work with Sports Illustrated with MJ Day, who has been champion for women empowerment, and we've been shooting for 10 years. As a photographer going through that journey with her, I know in the beginning of my journey it was all about shooting sexy cells. As we evolve, as women's voices are being heard, the audience, the social media, they realize that the audience are not just these teenage boys buying it from Walmart and taking it home and hide under their pillow. Listen, I was that teenager, so I can say that.
Right. And their dads.
And their yes, and their dads.
And their grandfathers.
So having the idea and notion to push forward the inclusivity, not in just the skin tone, but age and sizes of people. Those voices has been out there, and I'm just glad that they're being heard. And there's so many people out there that have been championing it. And I want to talk about this because it leads right into the notion of how Asian community has to stay together and help each other celebrate. One of the things I'm so proud of this year, shooting for Sports Illustrated, is that we have a Korean model who crossed the line what agency required to be. Her agency did not want her to come to a Sports Illustrated shoot. We had a model search. She defied them. She showed up, and I interviewed her, and I asked her, "Oh my God, I know you. You're a high fashion model. You were the prominent agency. Why are you here?" And she said, "Because Asian women can be beautiful and sexy in Sports Illustrated and still be proud." And I have goosebumps because that's what we want in this publication. That's what we want people to see and feel. And I got to shoot her. And it was so important for me because I wanted to be the Asian American photographer, shooting this beautiful Asian Korean model that celebrates her beauty on her own term. And that's what's starting to happen now. And in TV shows as well. The idea that we get to celebrate our cuisine in a way that is not just a drive-through Panda Express, right? So that's what Lucky Chow really draw me to you, Angela. You guys host together at this beautiful show called Lucky Chow. And I find such a kindred spirit because I have similar show that's in Asia. And honestly, what an amazing education to watch you guys' journey, because I get to see that quality of Asian historical history in America, where I didn't know was here. I'll be honest, I had to go to Asia and find it. So talk me through that journey. How did Lucky Chow even was born?
Okay, so I absolutely will do that, but I just want to pick up on the one point that you made about celebrating Asian models as not only beautiful, but also sexy. And maybe we come back to this subject in a little bit, but this whole notion also of Asian masculinity and the way that Asian men are never portrayed in mass media as sexy, as handsome. It's always some sort of, cliche, emasculated type of character. And I think that Asian portrayals in media, particularly for the way Asian men are portrayed, I think we have a long way to go there. I think that, Asian women are making strides there, but I think this whole notion of what is Asian male beauty, we still have a long way to go. But
I agree with that. I want to touch up on that because being a photographer who cast Asian models, absolutely. And for me, it took me a few years to be, I want to say, okay, I conformed to what white people think Asians supposed to look like.
Correct.
And therefore, because we have the biggest market, we have the most population, so if some agent sitting behind a desk that is pure white as a Dove bar saying that this Asian male model is going to be the mixed supermodel because we're going to put him in front of everyone, but we're not going to put the other Asians in front of him, he will become a super male model.
Right.
However, they're always the most slanted eyes, almond eyes, fair skin, and a nose bridge that white culture oppression of what Asian men supposed to be.
Right.
And I'm not sure you've gone through this, because you're Asian American, and I went through it growing up that everybody would fight me saying, "You're not Asian, you don't look Asian, you look Latin, you're Latin." Like there's always this notion that if you want to be Asian, you
have to look one way.
There's only one way and one way they know it. I might as well be walking around with a violin and say I'm Asian. Then they'll go, "Oh, he's Asian." Because I can't carry a piano with me everywhere I go.
Right. Right.
But yes, and that is something that I've absolutely been challenging the model industry and agents, and I call them out throughout this entire difficult time because I have the voice and I have the time to really call them out, because I personally offended in a culture, a white agent who never been to Asia tells me which Asian model that I should be photographing when I'm asking for a different model to shoot. Or tell me this Asian model will not work in this Asian market anymore because she's too big to be in that magazine. That is so offensive, and it is why a lot of successful Asian people in America no longer go back to where they're from to celebrate who they are. Because the people in this country actually tell them they don't need to.
Yeah.
That is my biggest problem in this industry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's great to have a platform as big as yours. And you're using it in the right way. So wait, just going back to Lucky Chow. So, so the founder of Lucky Chow, the show, is an incredible woman named Danielle Chang, who has been a dear friend of mine for the last decade. And Danielle and I actually got to know each other when I was at Condé Nast, my last year at Condé Nast. I was at Condé Nast Traveler, and she was launching a food festival in 2010 called Lucky Rice. And back in 2010, and this is going to sound crazy because everyone thinks like, oh, Asian food, it's so universal. But 10 years ago, she had a very, very simple idea, which is to start a food festival, a multi-city food festival that would raise awareness of Asian culture and Asian heritage through the lens of food. And back in 2010, this was the beginning days of David Chang. It was the beginning of, the Asian culinary scene sort of finding a sort of deeper sort of foundation among like star chefs. And she, showcased Cambodian food, Laotian food, Filipino food, like basically things now that you would think like, oh yeah, like everyone eats Lao food. It seems so normal now, but 10 years ago, this was actually a rather radical idea. So Condé Nast Traveler actually became her media sponsor for the festival and was her sponsor for a couple of years. And, we've stayed close over the last decade. And as I was leaving my last job at Ralph Lauren, we got to talking about how can we work together, because it's always something that we both wanted to do but never really had the right time. And at the time, she had just finished season 3 of Lucky Chow, which is an incredible show that she started 5 years ago and hosted 3 incredible seasons. She'd started to think about how to evolve the show, how to bring in new voices, and gave me this incredible opportunity really to join her as co-host and co-producer to continue to tell these incredible stories of Asian culture, history, heritage through the lens of food. And season 4 really leans in hard to, you mentioned something before about not, having to go back to Asia to sort of learn about Asian culture. I was born in New York City. I feel like I'm pretty firmly rooted in, Chinese American culture and Chinese food, But the thing that I learned through Lucky Chow, which was so incredible, was the diversity of Asian cooking around the country, the vast Asian diaspora, not only in America, but talking to chefs like Eric Ramirez, who is the chef at La Maison, who really put on the map Nikkei cuisine, which is this cuisine that is highly influenced by the Japanese immigration to Peru in the late 1800s, and who knew that there were Japanese people in Peru? I mean, a little bit of that kind of diaspora story I can relate to because my father actually, when he was a young man, immigrated from Guangzhou province to Havana, Cuba, where there was a huge bustling Chinese community in Cuba. And a lot of that had to do with cheap labor, working in the plantations, et cetera. But eventually there became a huge, community there. And that whole, like the Asian immigration to places in the Caribbean, like Jamaica, like Trinidad, to Guyana, to Brazil, the Japanese in Brazil, the Chinese in Brazil, that, we talk about Nikkei cuisine in Peru, but there's also a Chinese version of that in Peru called Chifa cuisine, which is a complete amalgamation of Chinese and Peruvian food, but they don't even consider chifa or Nikkei like hybrid. They consider that a standalone cuisine that has come. So like a lot of people use hybrid, which is kind of like I borrow a little bit of this and I, like fusion, but it's really not fusion. It has, because these immigrants have been there for so long, a brand new cuisine has started.
And a lot has to do with the resources of ingredients that's provided to them. And those ingredients redefine. And I love the fact that you're saying it's not fusion. It is not fusion, because fusion is, if I would have bought a bag of rice from Peru to Japan to make that food, that's fusion.
Yeah.
But the resources that you get in your own space, and the whole concept that you get to see this. Actually, I love the show that Padma's last doing called Taste the Nation, and I had an opportunity to talk to her. It is truly to find out what food identity is, and through that food identity, you find out who you are, right? And,
absolutely.
And you touch on the fact that I had to go back to Asia to find out who I am, and it's important to touch on that because I moved here when I was 14 years old, and when I was here, I reinvented myself as a whole new person because I was not well accepted because my personality in Asia, I just did not survive. I would not have survived. And by having that location change and having a new start, I literally felt I had a restart button, and God-given restart. I restart, new language, new way of living. And as I grew, I did not look back to Taiwan as where I'm from. I don't wave a flag or Taiwanese flag or Chinese flag. I don't get political. I put my head down like a good Asian boy and work really, really hard and to make sure that I can leave my house when I'm 18. I left when I was 16. I was really happy about that. And I came back when I left. but like I had to, that's what that was all about. And I did not think and ever go, I'm working hard because I'm Asian, or I'm Asian, therefore I have to do something. I just did based on pure survival instinct.
Yeah.
That's what I needed. And because of that, I had to go back to understand my roots. I had to go back and taste the food that I had so many years ago, 20-some years ago, and understand how I became who I become, and what water did I drink to become who I become. And I practiced my Mandarin for 3 months so I can do my own voiceover. So nobody else's voiceover but mine when I did a Mandarin version. So there's 2 versions of the show. And it was the most rewarding time because doing a pre-prep, I had to learn all these cuisines.
Yeah.
And my whole entire family, my aunts and uncles who all had restaurants in the past, all gather in the kitchen and teach me how to make authentic Taiwanese food.
Yeah.
Because I make my own version, but I wanted to really showcase the roots and culture. And then meeting people like you along the way that just truly inspires you to who you are.
Yeah.
And I needed to do that. And because of that, I know how rewarding it is and be able to walk the street I walked when I was at grade school and visit my grandmother who was 100 years old and took me back to the school where she used to take me to. It was emotionally crazy roller coaster, but it was awesome. But at the same time, when I watched Lucky Chow, when I watched your eyes seeing the world through the food that you guys are tasting, it does bring home to me here. And that's the first time I understood truly that how much culture that we have here that is still heritage driven, because we are very diluted. And you're right, the word fusion really ruined the Chinese food culture, right? So these shows are so important. And Taste the Nation, I learned that there's no such thing as American food because it came from Germany, it came from here, it came from and same as yours. And what I love most about it is that you're celebrating immigrants. You're celebrating first generation, second generation, third generation, and you're celebrating heritage. And you also celebrating likeness of what I can look at on TV and say, there he is.
Yes.
There is an Asian American who have broken glass ceilings along his way and still champion for a cuisine that many people think is cheap and is a takeout. But it's not just that, the heart and soul of it.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you saying that. That is, that's absolutely what we try to do with the show, is to just put, it's not, in a way it's, yes, we're a food show, but for us, it was really more about making sure that people understood where the food came from historically, and making sure that people realize that food is attached to culture, is attached to personal stories, that there's heart, that there's soul in every single dish that we show. I think it's interesting what you're saying about going back to, like, you went to Taiwan, and you sort of reclaimed your heritage and your excitement. Over the last decade, I have spent a lot of time in China, and I've spent a lot of time throughout Asia, actually. And I'll never forget, a couple years ago, and I've been to Hong Kong a million times, but there was one moment when I was walking down the street in Hong Kong, and I thought to myself, wow, I don't look different than anybody else walking down the street. I really felt like I fit in. I felt like I was walking the streets that my grandfather, my grandmother, my mother walked. Like, there was a sense of incredible connection, which I think a lot of American-born Asians don't necessarily feel. And a lot of it has to do with, parents just want you to assimilate as quickly as possible and be successful. But, this sense of belonging that I felt in Hong Kong was incredible. But I bring this up also because there are a couple of young chefs that we feature on Lucky Chow. Two come to mind immediately. One is Eric Z, who has an incredible Taiwanese restaurant called 886, which is based on the area code of Taipei. It's called 886. It's on St. Mark's Place. And Eric tells a really interesting story on our show in that when he was growing up, he was taught, he grew up in Taiwan, went to NYU, but when he was growing up in Taiwan, he thought everything was better in America. The TV shows were better in America, the movies were better in America, the food was better in America, the music, everything was better in the West. And, after coming to school in the US and meeting other Asian Americans and, meeting this guy, Trig Brown, who's the incredible chef at Winson, which is another Taiwanese restaurant in Brooklyn, Eric sort of reclaimed his Taiwanese identity and became more fascinated about Taiwanese food, the origins of Taiwanese food, the historical kind of implications of Taiwanese food, the fact that Taiwan had so much immigration from other places, including Japan, and when ingredients got there, really becoming an expert in kind of that history, that culinary history, has made him a better chef, but it's also given his food a sense of authenticity and life and vibrancy that I think truly comes from his heart, which is incredible. The other chef that I think is one of the most brilliant thinkers and cooks in the world is this young guy named Lucas Sin, who founded, you should know Lucas Sin, because, the conversations with Lucas Sin are brilliant. So Lucas Sin is one of the founders of Junzi Kitchen in New York and New Haven. And he, born in Hong Kong, raised in Hong Kong, came to the United States for college. He went to Yale. And at Yale, he has some cooks in his background. He talks about his father being one of the best cooks he knows and his grandmother being an incredible chef. But when he was at Yale, he started kind of playing with doing a pop-up restaurant in his dorm, which is incredible. And it was like a sit-down, like 5-course, very formal pop-up restaurant in his dorm, which professors would go to and, students. It was incredible. But, what's really interesting about Lucas is his cooking is really about understanding the technical aspects of really authentic Chinese cooking, but also understanding the history of dishes and where they come from and how ingredients came to be used, and just this incredible knowledge of, and I sort of feel like he has kind of, again, reclaimed his Chinese identity through food. And I personally find that incredibly exciting because, I have two nephews and a niece who I love very much, who are now second generation Chinese Americans. They don't speak Chinese. They barely understand it. They kind of like Chinese food, but one of my nephews actually doesn't even like Asian food. And to me, it's a bit worrisome that,
You know what, though? You'll come around.
I hope so.
We all do.
I think so too. They do eventually realize that that's what home is, right? And it's what comfort is.
DNA.
But,
it's in your DNA. One of these days, I'm going to kick in and go, you like that sugar and white rice. Sorry.
Yeah, right. It's like, I'm not making you nachos. I know that's what you want to eat, but I'm not making you nachos.
And I love seeing these chefs that embracing the Asian cuisine and really re-celebrate it again and again, because Chinese food have yet to reach that pinnacle of French cuisine. But what's very interesting is that on the show, I have opportunity to interview Melissa King, who's the all-star winner of Top Chef this season, and I'm meeting tomorrow, who is also a winner, and I also met Kristen. And one thing, and I purposely interview the Asian chefs because what I love about them most, all of them are Michelin star trained chefs.
Yes.
They all went to French Laundry, and they all done all the homework. And even my friend Shirley Chen, who has become my dear sister now, I talk to her every day, encouraging to get her restaurant to open, Miss Chi in Culver City. She's a dumpling queen, by the way. I can't wait for her to open up. And she too trained under Keller. I mean, like the best of the best. But guess what food they're making?
Yeah.
And what inspires them. It's truly what inspires them. And I love hearing that. And Ming and Kristen, they're making food that's more Americanized, but you know what? Because what runs through your blood, there's always a touch of twist that always comes through. And eventually you find your culinary voice. And for me, it wasn't just about a travel show to go back home and walk the same path I did when I was young. I wanted to pay respect to them, and I wanted to make sure that I interview people, not that they make the best food, but they carry their heritage the longest. I had one of the food that I had to taste, and it was not my palate, as I'm still learning to eat it, is eel. And it was so strong, and I'll say this, while we were filming, I actually took it out of my mouth, and I go, oh my God, it's so bad in Asian culture. I had to put it back in. but my producer's like, what are you doing? You got to put it back in your mouth.
Wait, what was the preparation? Was it like vinegary? Like what?
There's 3 ways they prepare. One is stir fry with pepper. One is very gooey, so it's a lot of cornstarch. And then the last one is on noodles, which is on very Cantonese style, on dry noodles, and they put it on top. But what I wanted to get out of it, and what I learned from this, that little place, it's been there for 3 generations, over 100 years old history, and the grandfather is the first person who took eel, which is just a fish that's in a rice patty that nobody even think is food, made it into a because he figured out how to actually butcher it. Because butchering eel, as you know, it's bloody. Number one, it's so gross, but it's hard. It's meticulous. So when I got to see that, that's when I realized, wow, their food might not be my palate, but it's worth celebrating. It's absolutely worth celebrating. And there are a lot of people who love it. It just happened to be the ones in my palate. It's like stinky tofu, you know? See, I love it. When I was in Hong Kong, every time I get off the train, I know I'm right by the night market or I'm right by the open market, because that stinky tofu will stink up the whole street, and I just follow it. I just follow it with my nose and grab it. But that's and that celebration of food right now is so important to me, and that's why I have it on the show so much, because I truly believe that if you love what you eat, love the people who created them, it'll bring happiness and kindness among all of us.
Yes,
truly,
absolutely.
What do we do when we Italians, Greek? We all celebrate our food. Even Americans, barbecue is a big deal. But if we can take a little time, a minute, just say, oh, I'm eating this hot dog. It came from Germany and Danish immigrants. Oh, immigrants brought it over. Got it. Oh, I'm eating a Roy Choice taco that's with amazing Kalbi beef and barbecue. You're like, oh, that came from Korea. Okay. And that I really truly believe can help all of us to have a little bit of solidarity and
Yes.
really appreciate each other more, you know?
Well, food is connection, right? I think food is connection for friends and family, but I think that food is connection for the global community. And I think that when you share a meal with someone, you learn so much more. You end up being much closer to them. And I think that that's really the power of food. And I think the more people who kind of think about that and realize that, the better.
And for me, I hate cooking for myself. When friends are over, I love it. Well, for two reasons. I love cooking for them, and I love them washing the dishes afterwards, because that's
Yeah.
the rule in my house. If I cook, you guys clean up.
Same with me.
Yeah. So if I come over to eat at your house, who's gonna clean?
What's that?
If I come over to eat at dinner at your house,
Oh,
who's
who
gonna
cooks
clean
and
the
who
dishes?
cleans? We'll take turns. So assuming it's a multi-day visit, you'll cook one night, I'll cook one night.
There you go. I
Yeah.
would love nothing more than that.
That
to
would be
really
super
share.
fun.
Yeah, absolutely, and truly, it's such amazing programming that you're putting out there for those guys. Lucky Chow, you can get it on the internet. You can go to PBS as well. You can follow.
It's on 95% of PBS stations around the
Yes.
country. To make it easier for you guys, if you want to binge watch, you can go to luckychow.org, where we have season 4, all 6 episodes of season 4 right there for you to watch. So that's it'll be easy. I encourage you all to do it. It is a pretty fun show.
And what's great about the show is that if you can keep your eyeballs on it the whole entire time, it runs really well as a podcast. You can really listen to the
Yeah.
voice of the people. And what's one particular story that you discovered that really changed you on the show?
I mean, there's so many, but I think if there's one, I think one of the most touching stories was really one of the first segments we shot in San Diego at Chino Farm, which is a third-generation Japanese-American farm on almost 60 acres of prime real estate in San Diego and Rancho Santa Fe.
Yeah.
And this family, not to go through the whole story, you can watch it on the show. It's actually it's in the first episode, Generations. The pain and suffering that this family went through when they came to this country and tried to make a life for themselves, finding themselves in an internment camp where they had to raise 7 children. Fast forward to today, third generation young guy, Makoto, who's in his late 20s, is following in his father and grandfather's footsteps in keeping this incredible farm going. And when I say it's an incredible farm, this farm probably produces the most beautiful produce, some of the most beautiful produce in America, if not the world. They sell to very few wholesale people, Alice Waters being one of them, Wolfgang Puck being one of them. But most of what they sell is just at this very humble vegetable stand that they open every single day. They grow heirloom varieties of watermelons.
That was incredible.
That Taiwanese.
Was so incredible. When I saw the Taiwanese watermelon, I was like, oh,
that Taiwanese watermelon is
giving us a moment. Thank you so much for that moment.
But like, here's the thing: like, who even knew that there were Asian varieties of watermelons? But it was called the sorbet swirl. This Taiwanese watermelon that was yellow flesh with a streaky pink in it, and the texture of it was different than American watermelon. It was sweeter. It was just incredible. So they grow beautiful melons. They grow the most beautiful raspberries you've ever seen. All their berries are incredible. And then Asian vegetables, incredible corn. And so that story touched me in that it's a story about survival. It's a story about perseverance. It's a story that touches upon a hateful period in America where the Japanese were treated as the enemy. And, one can see some similarities in today's current climate where the demonization of immigrants has really become a thing again. And, it's troublesome. But to see that family persevere and have this incredible success, and this young guy Makoto was a lawyer. He is a lawyer. He could have done anything, but what he chose to do is to stay at the farm and continue its legacy. And I think for me, that's incredibly important and one of the most satisfying stories we told.
One thing that took away from that story that really touched my heart was that he has never forgotten the passage, how he got there.
Yeah.
And at the same time, he still hold on to so much Asian value that I hope he can break at some point, is that to stand up and face the world that he's Japanese American.
Yeah.
Because in his story, when he said that there are times I just hide behind the company so people doesn't realize it's a Japanese farm so that they can survive. In a modern day right now,
yeah,
we still hear stories like that. Yeah. It's painful.
It is painful.
It's so painful. When one thing that connects all of us together is food, and he's putting one of the best food out there for people. He's wanting to hide his own face, who he is, and still feed the people out there. There's something wrong with that concept.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, he should put a sticker of his face and stick it on every watermelon and sell it that way.
Right. Well, you know, they have great fans, and I think that, you know, as long as we continue to showcase these people and highlight their accomplishments and their contributions, I feel like it leads to a greater understanding of Asian American culture and history.
And thank you for doing that. Thank you for celebrating the Asian American community.
It is absolutely our pleasure.
And then putting a spotlight on so many people that doesn't get the opportunity to share their passion. And for those of you guys out there, being a chef, being a farmer is not the glamorous job that you think.
No.
It is one of the hardest working necessity that we need to have in our world. And it is the immigrants. The immigrants are the backbone to our society. And through all the history of injustice that has been placed on the immigrants, they still stand up and being the first to be there to make sure they're fed.
Yes.
So with all that, if we can continue with you and I, continue to put spotlight on the immigrants, like Padma continue to share her stories, is what we need to do. I think when we all realize we're all immigrants, perhaps maybe we'll be kinder to each other.
Absolutely. Well said.
Well, William, thank you so much for being with me today. I can talk to you forever. Maybe we need to do part 2.
I love that.
I love it so much. And we didn't even touch on your fashion stuff, but thank you. And
You're
I will be watching for the next season. I know that this is not the time to film.
We're starting. It's not a time to film, but we're already starting to think about it. But thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's an absolute pleasure to meet you as well. Thank you guys so much for being with me here today. I love today's talk. It put such a smile on my face and made me extremely hungry for Chinese food and Asian food. I love the shows out there right now. Every show that's out there that celebrates immigrants, please watch. We all travel from one place to the other, and we bring as much diversity to this country. And I love the solidarity of our communities of color coming all together. And I just can't wait for the day that when we can all get together, have an amazing feast, an amazing meal, and celebrate what's new to come in this world that we're in. And I do believe we will. We will get there. We will get there. Thank you for being here with me. And I'll see you guys again tomorrow. Bye-bye.